அடுத்த பேச்சாளரை நாங்கள் அன்புடன் அழைக்கின்றோம். இவர் சமஷ்டி ஆட்சியை மையப்படுத்தி அரசியலில் ஈடுபட்டு வரும் இலங்கை தமிழரசு கட்சியின் முக்கிய ஆளுமைகளில் ஒருவரான, அதேபோன்று ஜனாதிபதி சட்டத்தரணியாகவும் இருக்கின்றார். யாழ்ப்பாணத்தில் இனிவிலில் 1964ஆம் ஆண்டு பிப்ரவரி மாதம் 9ஆம் தேதி பிறந்தவர். உள்நாட்டிலும் வெளிநாட்டிலும் உயர்கல்வி கற்று சிவில், மனித உரிமைகள் மற்றும் அரசியலமைப்பு சட்டங்களில் மாவட்ட நீதிமன்றம், மேல் நீதிமன்றம், மேன்முறையீட்டு நீதிமன்றம், உயர் நீதிமன்றம் வரை வெற்றிகரமாக வழக்காடி சட்டத்துறையில் விற்பனராக முத்திரை பதித்தவர். அரசியலிலும் நீதித்துறையிலும் ஒரு சேர கால் பதித்து நாடளாவிய ரீதியிலும் சர்வதேச மட்டத்திலும் நன்கு அறியப்பட்டவராக விளங்கி வருபவர். The next speaker is an experienced former parliamentarian and a President's Council, a prominent figure in the Ilangai Tamilarasu Katchi, and which is deeply engaged in politics centered on a federal rule in the United Sri Lanka. Was born on February 9th, 1964 in Inubil, Jaffna, received his education both locally and abroad, and left his mark on civil, human rights and constitutional laws, appearing at superior courts, and is well recognized nationally and internationally. So let me have the pleasure of inviting the former parliamentarian and President's Council, Madhya Baranam Abraham Sumanthiran, to address the audience.
Honorable Rauf Hakim, Mr. M. Amin, distinguished members of the audience, it is with great pleasure that I accepted the invitation to speak at this event. Yet, last night I was left in doubt as to whether I could make it here, for the reason that our party senior leader Mr. Mavai Senadiraja expired last night, and I was in Jaffna at that time, and I had to make a decision as to whether to call my friend Honorable Hakim and say that I will not be able to come here today. But for two reasons, I decided to come. எங்களுடைய மூத்த தலைவர் திரு மாவை சேனாதிராஜா அண்ணன் அவர்கள் நேற்று இரவு மரணம் அடைந்தது உங்களுக்கு தெரியும். அதனால் இந்த நிகழ்விலே கலந்து கொள்ள முடியாமல் போயிருக்கும் என்று நான் நினைத்திருந்தேன். ஆனால் இரண்டு காரணங்களுக்காக நேற்று நான் யாழ்ப்பாணத்தில் இருந்திருந்தாலும் கூட இன்றைக்கு இந்த நிகழ்வுக்கு வர வேண்டும் என்று நான் தீர்மானித்தேன். நான் இதனை திரு ஹக்கீம் அவர்களுக்கு இப்பொழுது சொன்னேன். அவருடைய அனுமதியோடு இந்த ஒரு சிறு விடயத்தையும் சொல்லி என்னுடைய மிகுதி விடயத்துக்கு வருகிறேன். இன்று காலை அனுராதபுர நீதவான் நீதிமன்றத்திலே முன்னாள் சிறைச்சாலைகள் அமைச்சர் ஒருவர் அரசியல் கைதிகளை முழங்கால் படியிட வைத்து அவர்களுடைய தலையிலே துப்பாக்கியை வைத்து மிரட்டின சம்பவம் சம்பந்தமாக அந்த முன்னாள் அமைச்சருக்கு எதிராக வழக்கொன்று தாக்கல் செய்யப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. அதிலே அந்த அரசியல் கைதிகளாக இருந்தவர்கள் சாட்சிகளாக இருக்கிறார்கள். அவர்களுடைய நன்மையை பாதுகாப்பதற்காக நான் அங்கே செல்ல வேண்டியிருந்தது. திரு சேனாதிராஜா அவர்கள் 7 வருடங்களுக்கு மேல் அரசியல் கைதியாக எந்தவித விசாரணையும் இல்லாமல் சிறையிலே இருந்தவர். ஆகையினாலே அவருடைய பூதவுடல் அங்கே வைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிற வேளையிலும் இப்படியான ஒரு விடயத்தை நான் கையாள்வதை அவர் ஏற்றிருப்பார் என்று நினைத்தேன். இரண்டாவதாக, திரு ஹக்கீம் அவர்கள் எழுதின இந்த புத்தகம் நான் அதனை படித்தபோது அதிலே இருக்கிற கருப்பொருள் மிக மிக அத்தியாவசியமானதான ஒன்றாக எனக்கு பட்டிருக்கிறது. அதுவும் என்னை அறிமுகப்படுத்தின போதே இலங்கை தமிழரசு கட்சி என்ற அடையாளத்தோடு சொன்னார்கள். இலங்கை தமிழரசு கட்சிக்கும் ஸ்ரீலங்கா முஸ்லீம் காங்கிரஸுக்கும் இருக்கிற நீண்ட உறவு, எப்படியான ஒரு அரசியல் கலாச்சாரம், ஒரு அரசியல் அமைப்பு உருவாக வேண்டுமெதிலே எங்களுக்கு இருக்கிற ஒற்றுமை, அதையும் மீறி அப்படியான ஒரு நிலைப்பாட்டுக்கு வருவதற்கான ஒரு பின்னணியை சமூக அளவிலே உருவாக்குவதற்கு இந்த புத்தகம் எவ்வளவுக்கு முக்கியமானதாக இருந்திருக்கிறது என்று நான் கருதின காரணத்தினால்தான் நான் இன்றைக்கு இந்த அழைப்பை ஏற்று இங்கே வந்திருக்கிறேன். Honorable Hakim has walked on knife's edge in writing this book. I say knife's edge because he's balanced well right through the book. And that's not an easy task for somebody who's giving leadership in the particular context in which our country is today, where it is now entrenched as identity politics. And he gives leadership to one community, the leading political party of one community. But even so, this is an example of how theory and practice brings out the best. There is deep-seated contemplation, deep-seated theory in that book. And yet, he's moderated it with his long experience in politics, the practice of politics, and so we have a gem of a book in our hands today. I'm not going to go into details of the book because that has been done exceptionally well by the book review and Mr. Zuhair as well earlier. I just want to say how fortunate we are to have this book in our hands today. Because this is not just demystifying the wrong perception about the Muslim community in Sri Lanka. That he has done well. But in the process, he's touched the nerve center. He's touched what many fear to touch, and exposed and explained how coexistence is possible by the different communities who live in this island. Now, in that task, I say it's a brave effort because he is perceived and in fact is the leader of one community. And he can be hated by that community for some of the things that he says in this book. He can be hated by the other two communities also for some of the things that he says in this book. Yet, he has bravely undertaken this task, and I am deeply grateful that this is a writing that can be read by all communities, have deep contemplation as to the truth that is there in it, and then hopefully change our behavior so that we live with our distinct identities in place, yet reconciled and as a nation together. At page 2 of his introduction itself, he says that Sri Lanka has a unique characteristic that is structured and shaped by Sinhala Buddhism. இலங்கை தீவு ஒரு தனித்துவமான தன்மையுடையது. அது சிங்கள பௌத்தம் என்ற அடிச்சுவட்டிலே கட்டப்பட்டிருக்கிறது என்று சொல்லுகிறார். Now, we may not like it. Particularly those of us who belong to the other communities certainly will resent it. But nevertheless, that is the truth. That is the truth, whether we like it or not. And he's had the courage to say it. Now that's just one example. He's critiqued his own community, he's critiqued the other communities also, which again I think calls for a lot of courage, because sometimes you can critique your own community but you can't critique the other community. Immediately the question will be asked, who are you to talk about us? Us and them have been the huge issue in this country, particularly post-independence history of this country. A lot of our time we have spent, or rather most of our time we have spent in post-independent history fighting each other. And if that continues anymore, even after we reach 100 years of our post-independent history, then this country is certainly doomed. So I see the wisdom if people stop to read and contemplate and then allow that wisdom in this book to change their behavior in this country, all communities, then there is hope. I don't normally heap such lavish praise on anyone or any book, but I feel compelled to do that today because I read through the book and I am very, very impressed by that. I'm not saying it patronizingly, but I'm saying it because it has very deep meaning. And we need to do that because we are looking at the future. So, unless you look at your past and you figure where you are, who the other person is, we cannot proceed together into the future. So this, I believe, gives us that incentive to look at the future and move forward with a different outlook. One word about Professor Hoole's book, which has been translated into Tamil. Honorable Hakim and I were members of the Parliamentary Select Committee that investigated into the Easter Sunday attacks. Before we could write our report, that book was published. And we had the benefit of reading that book before we wrote our report. And in that report, if you read that report, in the executive summary itself, we have raised a question as to whether this was made to happen in order to create in the country a call for a strong ruler with a presidential election due to happen later in the year. Those words are there in our Parliament Select Committee report. And a few years down the line, a man called Azad Maulana says, well, that's what happened. Sivanesathura Chandrakanthan's Pillayan's secretary, who's fled the country, says, whether that is true or false is another matter, but he's given details that have been published. Mr. Zuhair read from the Supreme Court judgment that touches upon the deep state. And that is what Professor Hoole has also brought out. Now, this is a very important issue. The Deputy Speaker is not here with us, because I am going to publicly throw a challenge to the new government. On this very stage, the Honorable Minister of Justice Harshana Nanayakara and I spoke about the Anti-Terrorism Act or Anti-Terrorism Law or Bill that was brought, ATA, and said we don't need any replacement for the PTA, for the Prevention of Terrorism Act. It must be repealed without replacement. He also said that. Prior to that, when there was a CTA draft, Counter-Terrorism Act, the position of NPP was that complete repeal, no replacement. They said that in Parliament. They refused to participate in committees that discussed the CTA. Where we went and discussed, they didn't even come because their position was total repeal, no replacement. We are seeing a somersault today. We are seeing a complete somersault today. And my suspicion is that that is being caused by the deep state, no less. The security sector, and particularly the deep state, will not allow any government to do what even they have campaigned for. So that is why I say I am throwing out a challenge to the new government. If you want to stand true to your own words, repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act without replacing it. Or else, you are under the yoke of the deep state. Second challenge. The Supreme Court has found several persons guilty of not preventing the attacks. No one yet has been found guilty for having organized these attacks. How is that even possible that you don't know? There were security warnings, intelligence warnings from India 3 weeks prior to the attack with names. Some of those names were intelligence officers. No one was arrested. No one was apprehended. No one was even followed. Not only 3 weeks prior, the day before, that very morning at 6, frantic messages came. From where was this messages coming? What was the source? That source didn't die in the attacks, in the suicide bombings. It was coming from another country. Why is it then not possible? Why is it not possible? I was watching the interests of late parliamentarian Raviraja's family when the trial of his murder took place in the High Court of Colombo. Some of the accused were intelligence officers, naval intelligence officers. After the state, the Attorney General led evidence to implicate them with the murder of Raviraj. When the defense was called, the then head of the SIS, State Intelligence Service, came and gave evidence on behalf of the defense and said what the state is saying is not true. He continued in that office even thereafter. He was the SIS chief when the Easter Sunday attacks took place also. So even when the Attorney General of the country had indicted some intelligence officers, as was said by Mrs. Ware, the government within a government or another government that is outside the pale of the law, outside, they function separately. and no one dares touch them. If he was dealt with at the time he went against the state's position, he would not have been the chief of SIS at the time the Eastern attack took place. He was found guilty also and removed from his position subsequently after all the damage was done. So the challenge to the government is, all right, investigate the Easter Sunday attack. Someone has given evidence. It has been published by Channel 4. Look into that. Are you daring enough to do that? If not, we must conclude that you too don't have the backbone to face up to the truth, to face up to hidden hands. Marai Haram, Tamil Marai Haram, a deep state, the hidden hands. And you will be actually exposing yourself as those who are controlled by those hidden hands. With those comments, may I again congratulate Honorable Hakim for this excellent work that he has done, which I hope will be used and practiced so that we can go forward as reconciled communities that recognize each other, our distinct identities, and yet ones who are able to live together. Thank you.